Hello, everyone. Come on in. We will pretend like we're back in college at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, Dearborn, or Flint, and I'll welcome you to come up to the front of the room. The seats up front are all open and waiting just for you. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Welcome to all the alumni and friends of the University of Michigan. My name is Kiara Trotter, and I serve as the Director of Alumni Career and Education for your Alumni Association, and I use pronouns she and her. We are very excited, ecstatic even, and grateful to have Jeremy Schiefling with us as we explore this month's webinar topic, LinkedIn and ChatGPT for interviewing advanced interview hacks. We know that the job search has never been more challenging than it is today, and so we have a wealth of resources and programming that we'll share in the chat throughout today's session and in a follow-up email. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will also be shared with you in the follow-up email. Please go ahead and submit your questions using the Q&A feature in your toolbar. The chat is also open for you to engage with other participants and Jeremy during the session. If you've ever attended a webinar with Jeremy, you know that this is going to be a ride and Jeremy is going to keep you engaged. So whatever you say in the chat, Jeremy will see. We'll do our best to address as many questions as we possibly can, and Jeremy also does an amazing job with that. All right, so now a little bit more about today's speaker. Jeremy Schiefling has devoted his career to helping others succeed in theirs. From teaching kindergarten in Brooklyn to recruiting top students at Teach for America to leading education marketing at LinkedIn, he's touched the lives of literally millions of people at every stage of their journeys. Along the way, he's published the best-selling LinkedIn and ChatGPT for job-seeking books on Amazon, served as a career coach for military veterans at shift.org and MBA students at the University of Michigan, and produced the most viewed video in LinkedIn's history. So if it's not already obvious, we have the superhero of careers with us today, Jeremy Schiefling.
Thank you so much, Kiera. Oh my goodness, I'm totally blushing over here, but I really appreciate the kind intro and welcome everyone. I'm super excited that you're joining us today. And by the way, who watched the Big Ten championship game this weekend? Oh my goodness, it took me back to my student days. Please put some nice emojis in the chat or put some emojis in the Zoom because your Wolverines were on fire this weekend. Incredible. That being said, I'm super excited to give the real love to the true superheroes, which are Kiera and Brooke and Chelsea, everyone who's working hard at the Alumni Association. Because let's face it, this is a kind of a tough moment right now in our economy. Who knows where things are going to head? Who knows what the job outlook is going to be? But the idea that no matter what's coming up next, your team has your back, those are the folks who truly deserve your love. So be sure to give them a lot of nice emojis in the chat and let them know that you appreciate all of their hard work. And for those who are asking, absolutely, you're going to get a recording of the session, but the real benefit is joining live because that's how you build your interview muscles. Consider yourself now in the interview gym. And like Kiera said, I've had this super lucky Michigan career myself, where I got my start as a kindergarten teacher back in New York City, came to University of Michigan for grad school, got access to all these great jobs, and yes, worked inside LinkedIn to really understand how the hiring process works. And so even though I've had a chance to be all these different places, I think that the entire hiring process and the interview process in particular that I've experienced boils down to three core principles. The first is so often when we are going to school or graduating from school, we are in that school mindset. Everything in life is just one big standardized test. Break out your number two pencils, get the right answer. And then you walk into your first interview. And if you've been in a one interview or a million interviews, you know the truth that human interviewers are not Scantron machines. They are not right, wrong. They're just thinking about how they feel about you. There's a much more emotional and human decision. And so, what I want us to do today is to go way beyond just sort of that very basic understanding of interviewing to really looking inside our human crania to start to understand what the heck is going on in there. Because once we understand what really matters, we can ditch that classic technique of let me just memorize all my answers and hope for the best, and instead really start to empathize with our interviewer and give them what they need to give us that opportunity. However, as Kiera said, this is not at all your standard webinar. And you know what I'm talking about. You show up, you kind of turn your brain off a little bit, you do a little light multitasking. No way. I'm going to ask for a lot. First of all, I've got some pop quizzes coming your way. So whether you're a new grad or whether you've been out of Michigan for 40 years, I'm going to put you back in your student shoes to answer some of those in the chat. Number two, I'm going to give you a chance to volunteer for some live demos today because if you join me, you're not just going to really build these interview skills, you're going to get something pretty awesome in return, which is a choice. For anyone who's brave enough to volunteer for one of these live role plays, I will either give you a copy of the world's best-selling ChatGPT book or something even better. I will personally make over your LinkedIn profile so you can stand out in this crazy hiring market that is 2025. So if you want either of those opportunities, just be sure to raise your hand when the time is right. And then finally, most importantly, do the classic Michigan thing of taking action. Not just watching, not just listening, not just standing on the sidelines, but trying these techniques in real time to start getting immediate results. So, with all that said, let's start with the first pop quiz. If you had to get a guess, what percentage of all the interviewers surveyed admit to making up their minds in the first 5 minutes, what's your answer? Is it A, 7%, B, 24%, or C, a whopping 49%? And look at this, Kiara. Look at this, Brooke. We've got so many C's flooding in. Patrick
C,
saying
C, C,
C.
C, C.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what we're telling here, and this is what we were talking about beforehand, Kiara, is that the human algorithm is so different than the computer algorithm. Yeah, a computer may digest all information and think about it holistically, but as a species that's trained for survival, where we have to make fight or flight decisions throughout the entire sort of history of our existence, we are used to making these split second decisions. And so the really critical word here is not just the 49%, but it's the admitted. I would venture, based on my own experience as a hiring manager, that probably the answer is closer to 80 or 90%, but very few people want to actually admit it. And so, what does that mean? If we now know that people are deciding our fate in just a couple of minutes, what we've really got to do is not get caught up in that interview mania. Oh, I'm so worried about my case question or my estimation question or what I'm going to write on the thank you letter. And instead, focus on the most important question of all, which is the first one. Tell me about yourself. And so, because we often think of it as a throwaway, because we often think of it as just a pure icebreaker, we need to sort of orient our mental model and say, hey, this may be the only thing we talk about in 5 minutes. So let me make it a really great way to start. And if you want to win those first 5 minutes and win that interview, you've got to come back to that human algorithm, that human black box that sits between our ears. Because it turns out when sociologists have spread out across the globe to understand how other humans evaluate each other across cultures, across geography, it always comes back to two things. Number one, is this person competent? Can they do the job? But also, number two, are they warm? Would I want to do the job with them? And as a result, it's not going to be just about what you say, it's going to be how you say it. And to prove this, let me show you the absolute wrong way to answer these questions, which is the way that I usually answer them when I first got to Michigan. So imagine I was interviewing with Apple or Google, and they say, hey, Jeremy, tell me about yourself. And I said, okay, everyone else that I know is giving them a long laundry list of everything they've done, so I'm going to do the same thing. Safety in crowds. Here's where I went to college for undergrad. Here was my first job. Here was my second job. Now I'm at Michigan. Now I want to work for your company. And even though that seemed safe, it turned out it was deadly dangerous because it failed those two tests. Number one, if you're looking for someone who's organized and competent, this guy just stringing together a long list of random things with no connective tissue. And then if you want someone who's passionate and warm and engaging, this guy is deadly cold because his entire career is just this long checklist, no sense of drive, no sense of a North Star. So when I first started to be that rare former kindergarten teacher, winning those tech jobs that everyone else wanted, I realized I had to stand out. I had to win those first 5 minutes. And so instead of using that laundry list technique, I started to think more like a three paragraph essay, just like we learned in middle school. And I would start with a clear thesis statement. In my case, it was two things that I was absolutely passionate about throughout my career. Whether I was a kindergarten teacher or a nonprofit worker, I wanted to use technology to help kids be successful. That is my North Star. Now, to walk the talk, let me prove it to you. Here's what I did in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn to help kids get access to opportunities that their parents hadn't had. Here's how I use technology to bring mentoring all around the world to 300,000 kids. And if I could do that with the limited resources of a school or a nonprofit, imagine what I could do with the world's largest professional network to bring that power to every student around the world. And the reason that this worked so well was not just that format, but what it represented. Number one, clear structure. Just like we follow a really clear argument from thesis to evidence conclusion, that's what this had. And number two, if you want someone who's driven, who's going to really stick around and may leave a big dent in the universe, this starts with passion and it's lit by passion throughout. And so, what we're going to do right now is we're going to try that exact framework that I call PET. That stands for passion, evidence, and tie it back to the company. Why is that relevant for them? And to try this out, what we're going to do is we're going to give our first chance for a free profile makeover, first chance to win a copy of that book. If you are willing to give this a shot right now, to try out this new technique and help everyone learn how to do it really well, raise your hand right in Zoom. And our first volunteer today is going to be Jared Wesley. So, Jared, I'm going to give you the ability to chat. And actually, Kira, if you don't mind doing it on your side because you have the co host ability, can you allow Jared Wesley to unmute his line? And then we're going to give Jared a ton of love in the chat for being our awesome first volunteer. Welcome to Jared. All right, so Jared, if you click that little unmute thing, you'll see you're getting lots of emoji love. Thank you for joining, Jared.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello. Jared, tell us about yourself. When did you
All
go to
right.
Michigan? What did you study? What are you up to out there in the wider world?
So I went to Michigan for business,
Okay.
and my focus outside of Michigan has been all about uh, how we connect low-code software development with solving real-world problems for
Ooh.
business.
Oh
So
my
one thing
goodness.
that I found was I love and was passionate for software development and engineering, but business couldn't see the value. And you've got to tie the engineering back to business value. So that's when
Yeah.
I got involved with a company called OutSystems and
And Jared,
working
let
on
me just stop you right
projects.
there real quick. So, before you dive into your answer, I just wanted to ask you a quick sense of where are you in your sort of career exploration? Like, are you thinking about applying for a new job? Are you sort of just thinking about it down the line?
I'm actually in the process of searching for a new job right now.
Okay,
So
awesome. And so, what would be like
I
the dream role for you in terms of do you want to be like a general manager, a product manager, a software engineer?
dream job would really be tying in the sales side with the engineering side, really bridging that gap, bringing the customers
Oh,
together.
super cool. So maybe like sales solutions or something like that.
Correct.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so let's set this up. So basically, you're about to walk into an interview. And by the way, Jared, I literally saw in the chat, some people are about to interview like an hour from now. So we've got to help all those folks out there, but kind of walking the talk on this process. And so, Jared, if you're going to go into interview for a company that needs your sales solution excellence, someone who can be amazing with clients, but also amazing with engineers, I really need to get an amazing answer in those first couple minutes. So I want you to take a moment, Jared, and I want you to start to jot down on a piece of paper or your computer what's the biggest sort of passion that's driven you in your career. I think you were speaking to it before in terms of, like bringing low code software to solve real world problems. I want you to have a little bit of an exhibit A and an exhibit B to really walk the talk. And then I want you to explain why that matters to me. If I'm the hiring manager, if I'm about to put you into this critical role, why are you going to make sure that my needs are taken care of? And so does that make sense, Jared, just in terms of like a overall framework?
It does. Yeah.
Okay. Now, while Jared gets his notes organized, I want everyone to do the exact same thing right now. Whether you're interviewing in an hour, a day, a week, a month, you're going to be in these hot seats in a moment. And so you want to be ready for prime time. I want you to start to think a little bit about your North Star. I want you to think a little bit about your track record, not everything you've ever done, but just the most relevant stuff. And then I want you to think about why that matters for your future boss. And so, Jared, when you're ready, let me know, and we'll do a little practice with a little feedback right afterwards.
Okay. So I would say my passion is about connecting software engineers and solving real world problems to drive meaningful impact.
Okay,
I have
nice.
a proven ability to bridge the gap between technology and societal challenges, exemplified in initiatives like ProChamps, where I help develop a software platform that connects local governments with banks to solve blight issues in communities. And what we're able to do is actually pull in data from 22 million pieces of data per week dealing with foreclosure property registry issues, provide that revenue to local communities to help fight blight in their local neighborhoods.
Wow, super cool.
So that would be like jumping into something I did, framing some of my work history that just sits on my resume.
Yeah. Carol says you're hired. I love that, Jared. And then last little piece, Jared. And why does that make you the right person, for my sales solution role? Like, why do you think you're the person to come in here and just hit a home run on your first swing?
So the reason I would be the right person for this role is because I have that experience and that passion, and I've replicated that through several companies. Did something similar with PetChamp, my work there. In addition to Hera would be another example of connecting the actual sales process with the engineering talent to develop that new product
Okay,
that
beautiful.
has a benefit in the government technology space.
I love that. Well, hey, Jared, you were amazing. Everyone, please shower Jared with some maize and blue love because he rocked the big house here. And
Thank
Jared, I'm going to give
you.
you some honest feedback, but I would also like to crowdsource some of this feedback. So if you've got thoughts for Jared, please put them in the chat so Jared can benefit. Okay, first things first. I love how fast you adapted to that new model, Jared. I will tell you, having done this probably like 1,000 times, most people are really stuck in that laundry list mode where they want to tell me every job they had and why they left the job. And before you know it, I'm just completely lost and bored. So the fact that you switched over to this model immediately, that's incredible. I love that. I think also the part that I found most interesting was that middle part, of course, the meat of the sandwich, if you will. Because when you started to talk about your experience using technology for good and connecting it to a real social challenge, now I started to visualize you doing that for my company, which is, of course, the dream for any interviewer. So I love those elements. That being said, I am going to push you a little bit on coming across even more authentic. And I know this is tricky now because we're all in this world of like Zoom interviews and it's tempting to have like, a notepad on the side that you're looking at. Always avoid the temptation just to like read the answer or give it out too scripted. Because what we're all looking for as humans is authenticity, that sense of warmth that this person is not just sort of a robot, but actually a really great flesh and blood colleague who we're going to love to spend time with, especially if we have to spend more time with our colleagues than our own family. And so if you can infuse that into your answer, and then the last little piece of advice I'll give you is always be really crystal clear with your opening. So you had mentioned this sort of like, I really like working with engineers, connecting with engineers. I like social, impact, all this other stuff. If you can make it a little tighter up front, where it says, "Hey, all my life, ever since I graduated from the University of Michigan, I have strove to find ways to take the power of technology and turn it into useful opportunities for others." If you could get to that level of thesis, now you've got me hooked, and I want to see all of those examples flow from that. But other than those two minor quibbles, Jared, the fact that you were ready to rock with that so quickly, I give you huge kudos, man, and I cannot wait to see you succeed. Okay, Jared?
Appreciate it. Thank you, Jeremy.
Okay, so Jared, do me a huge favor. Shoot me a note on LinkedIn right now before you forget about it. Let me know whether you want the book, the profile makeover, whatever's useful. And I've got a bonus offer too. Check this out, y'all. I know you're thinking, wait, this was great for Jared, but what about me? How do I get that chance to practice? Well, it turns out that LinkedIn has your back. Because if you come over to LinkedIn and you come specifically to this link that's pretty hard to find, so I'm going to give it to you right in the chat, what you will discover is that LinkedIn has its own interview simulator built in. And sure enough, what is the most common question that everyone's going to face? Tell me about yourself. So what you're going to do here is exactly what Jared did, but with some extra bonuses. Number one, just like the Michigan basketball team, you're not going to practice just in your head. You're going to practice on tape because you know that an interview is only as good as the receiver believes it to be, no matter how great you think you did. So you need to see yourself as they saw you. And then number two, just like the Michigan coaching staff, you've got to give tough feedback. You've got to come in here and say, hey, is my velocity right? Am I varying my pitch so it's really interesting and engaging? Am I falling back on those filler words, those ums, those A's? And then here's the really amazing thing. Check out what you can do, Jared. You can take your sample answer and you can share it with a Michigan alum inside the company you're interviewing at to get insider info. And here's the best part, Scott. The stuff that I just showed you is absolutely free. It's available day or night. So whenever you want to go into that interview gym, build up that muscle, you can get those reps in whenever you need them. Okay, Jared, you were awesome. I cannot thank you enough.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. And Jared, feel free to, by the way, send me some of your interview answers if you want. Happy to give you more feedback as well.
Okay.
Okay, awesome. Everyone, give us one last blast of love to Jared. And by the way, if you've got questions, try to put those down in the Q&A section. I know there's always like a million modules in Zoom, but if you put them in Q&A, I'll be sure to see them and we'll get a chance to make sure that every last question is answered. Okay, before we move on, Kiera, Brooke, anything that you saw in the chat that you wanted to call out for the benefit of the Michigan community?
I did want to highlight for Jared that there was some feedback that people
Yeah,
put in the chat that looked really, really helpful. So, Jared, feel free to check that out. And of course, you can check out the recording if you want to take down what Jeremy said too.
I know. That was amazing.
And yeah, I think that's about it. A lot of love for Jared so far.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so let's see here. We'll take some questions. We'll take one question from the chat and one question from the Q&A. Ashwin says, by using this PET framework, we don't need to talk about our former employers at all. Yeah, so Ashwin, when you use this PET framework, you are still going to talk about the things that you did. So for example, I'm talking about being a kindergarten teacher. I'm talking about working at this nonprofit in New York City, but you're not going to get hung up on all the formal stuff. Here's why I changed the job. Here's why I left the job. Like no one needs to know about that stuff because at the end of the day, all they care about is, are you going to be awesome for them? And if you can hone down your answer to just the stuff that matters, you're going to make the most of those handful of minutes you have to make that first impression. Okay, let's see here. Natasha has a great question from the Q&A. How do you make a compelling story about yourself on LinkedIn if you're interested in many different industries? Ah, Natasha, I've got a little AI magic for you here. So let's say you're going after multiple roles. How do you tell one single story? Because on LinkedIn, you're limited to one single profile. So what you're going to do is you're going to come over to ChatGPT or any preferred AI, and you're simply going to say, what are the 10 key skills in common between product manager and product marketing roles? So maybe you're considering these two different roles in the tech world. What it will do, and I'm going to give you this prompt right in the chat, is basically build you a Venn diagram. Sure, these roles are a little different, but they share so many common strengths. And so now, as you sit down to write your about section, write your skill section, you don't have to have two separate hymnals. You can sing from the same one because you see what they share in common. That's how you get to that sort of unified profile, Natasha, which of course is the holy grail of LinkedIn. Great question. Okay, question from Olivia. Tips for interviewing internally, interviewing for promotion, interviewing with an interview committee. Yeah, Olivia, here's the huge advantage of interviewing internally. You have the ability to do incredible detective work using LinkedIn, using your internal access. So let's say, for instance, that I was interviewing for a different role at my company. What I would absolutely want to do is I would want to find out all the people on the hiring committee, so I'd look them up on LinkedIn, and then I want to see what we have in common. And LinkedIn is pretty good about that. We'll say, hey, you used to work at the same company together, or you went to the same schools, or whatever else. Then you schedule a quick coffee chat and you get to know them. You get to understand what they're looking for. What is sort of their North Star in terms of a great hire? So when you walk into that internal interview, you're not walking in cold like a total stranger. You're walking in warm like the insider you are. So use those tools, use those internal access points to get that extra advantage in that critical consideration. Okay, we have such an
Jeremy,
important part. Oh, yeah, yeah,
I'm sorry, can I ask a follow-up question
yeah,
to that one? So, if you are interviewing for a promotion within the same company that you work for right now,
yeah,
sometimes that can be really challenging because people know you there. They know a bit about your track record.
yeah,
Um, are there any additional thoughts about how to, still come across passionate using the PET model, but
yeah.
accounting for the fact that people already know you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the trick here is that it's even more important in some ways to really define yourself from the get-go. One of the big issues with that sort of laundry list model that most people use is that you leave yourself as kind of this nebulous gray fog, and now they get to define you how they want. They say, oh, this person seemed a little weak or a little bit uninterested. Versus if you come in right off the get-go, no matter what your reputation, no matter what faux pas you've made in the past, you get to build your own blank slate definition because you're coming in strong right from the top. So in some ways, it's even more important for folks who are trying to potentially shift their positioning inside an organization, especially if you're going from like an IC role to a manager role. Talk about your passion for leadership. Talk about how you've been a leader in volunteer initiatives, because that can reframe you as, hey, it's not just Jeremy, the low level guy, it's Jeremy who's ready for the next jump. Okay, speaking of next jumps, I know this is such an important question, Kiera. Someone said, if you're a little bit on the more experienced side, do you talk about your depth of experience? Do you try to cover it up? And this speaks to sort of that classic question around ageism. So first of all, let's face facts. Ageism is absolutely real. Here I am out in Silicon Valley. I'm almost like 45 years old. I'm probably the oldest guy around whenever I walk into any of these companies. If that is not exhibit A and that sort of evidence of ageism, I don't know what is. That being said, I still believe, just like we were talking about in the last example, that you get to control your narrative. So rather than fall into the trap of, okay, I've got to list everything on my profile, everything on my resume, talk about everything in my interview, I want you to curate your answer to the most relevant things. Not only does it do you a favor because it gets rid of any baggage that you have of having, 30 years of experience, but it also helps the interviewer because it focuses their attention on the stuff that matters most. Please do not feel any obligation to cover everything you've done if it's not important, if it's not relevant. Always think about your career and your story as a Sports Center highlight reel, not just sharing all the missed layups, all the blown passes, but just the dunks, just the 3-pointers that make you a rock star to the person who wants to hire you. Okay, I know we're getting a little bit late into the session, so in the interest of keeping this rolling, I'm going to keep on moving to the next pop quiz, but I'll take a lot more questions as we go. Okay, let's talk about the next big thing. Of these 3 assessment methods that you see on my screen, so conversational interviews, behavioral interviews, case interviews, which do you think is the most solidly predictive of future performance based on a massive amount of HR research? Okay, now here's getting a little interesting here, a little spicy. All
Exactly.
the A's and B's are duking it out. What's your instinct, Kira, as someone who's super deep in the space?
I'm gonna go for B.
B. And it turns out that's exactly where the research nets out. Because what is the point of an interview? Is it just to go through the motions, to uphold tradition? No way. It is to predict the future. And as a result, if you are a hiring manager or a recruiter, you want the very best crystal ball. And it turns out, when done well in a very structured manner, asking people to describe their past experience, tell me about yourself, tell me about your time, is actually the best way because it's the hardest thing to fib on. It holds your feet to the fire, and it gives us the best sense of what you can do in the future based on what you've done in the past. So you're going to get a million of these questions. Tell me about a time you influenced a team. Give me an example of how you solved a problem with data. All of these kind of classic behavioral questions. Now, when I first got to Michigan, I was still under the impression that the whole point of the interview was just to show off, just to sort of make yourself look awesome, even if you had to push other people down at the same time. As a result, you can see the disastrous answers that I had for these kinds of questions. I talked all about myself. I basically otherized everyone else, like, oh, these people were offshore developers. And then I sort of made myself the hero. And then everything miraculously got wrapped up by the end of the story. And of course, when I started to sit in the interviewer seat, I realized what a massive faux pas this was. Number one, we all know that the best stories have the juiciest details. If you are talking to a friend and they're telling you about a hot date that they had, you don't say blah, blah, blah. You say, tell me everything, because that's what brings the story to life. And then number two, you always want to hear about the relationships. You want to hear about who was involved, what was going on with them, how did you build a bond? And if you fail to do that during this opportunity, you've basically closed the door on the opportunity for yourself. So what do you have to do? You got to go right back into what you learned at Michigan, hopefully from your own career coaches, which is that classic model where you're starting to talk about, hey, here were the stakes. Here's what I was up against. Then here's what I had to do to overcome those challenges, working with others, getting to know them, getting to understand their needs. And then, only then, based on those relationships, was I able to drive all these results in tandem with my amazing team. And this approach is both way richer from a storytelling standpoint, but also way richer from an empathy perspective, because it really starts to get at who these folks are. And so, whether you call it star or scar or car, it all boils down to the same storytelling technique that our species loves because it really builds up the tension, makes it exciting. It's got some heroic action, and of course, it's got that nice happy ending. And so, if you want to try that scarred approach right now and win a free profile makeover from yours truly, I want to see every hand go up in Zoom right now. And our very next volunteer is going to be Steve Aldrich. So, Steve, I'm going to ask Kiera to give you access. You've got the microphone. Feel free to unmute. And then everyone gives Steve so much love for being our next volunteer. Welcome, Steve.
All right. Hey, thanks everyone. And Jeremy, nice to chat with you.
Likewise.
Uh,
And Steve, before we get into this, tell us a bit about yourself. When did you go to Michigan? Which school did you study in? All that good stuff.
sure, yeah. So went to Michigan for undergrad, was over in Dearborn actually.
Nice.
Studied business. Yeah, and glutton for punishment. I'm back on campus on faculty now. So
What?
College of Business. Yeah, lucky me. It's been a fun opportunity to kind of share the learnings and pay it forward.
Double Wolverine. I love that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And so, in terms of where you are in your own career journey, are you thinking about helping your students? Are you thinking about interviewing for roles yourself? Like, what's that next step for you?
Sure, that's part of the fun of it. I get a chance to not only help myself, but help others. So I'm constantly working with the students to just understand where they're at, where they're trying to go, and give some feedback that I hope is relevant and impactful for them. As it happens, I moonlight in academia, and so I have a day job in corporate America.
Ah.
Unfortunately, there was some change with me recently, and
Oh,
so
no.
I'm out in the hunt.
Okay. God, well, hey, you are not alone. I think people will tell you right in the chat. There are a lot of folks out there who are in that same boat. So just know that you've got an amazing Michigan network to draw upon. One thing I'll mention real quick, because I didn't have a chance to mention it before, is you actually have this entire alumni tool on LinkedIn with access to hundreds of thousands of Michigan alums from across the spectrum, every cool company, every part of the world. So be sure to tap into that. That being said, Steve, if you could interview anywhere for your next day job, what would be a super exciting opportunity for you?
I've had the opportunity like you to work out in Silicon Valley, lived out there for the
Yeah.
better part of a decade and had some, phenomenal community personally and professionally. And so, fortunately, we live in a world that don't always need to be on site. And with that in mind, I'd love to be connected to tech. Doesn't necessarily have to be West Coast based, but just,
Yeah.
infused in an environment where we're putting, we're working smarter, not harder.
Yeah, absolutely. So tech role somewhere out there. And then
Yep,
because recruiters always hone in on function, they say, hey, it's nice that you want to work in tech, but
sure.
which seat on the bus should I put you in? What's that right seat for you, Steve?
You got it. Yeah. So outside of business school, I've been focused the majority of my career in procurement space.
Yeah. Beautiful. Okay, so imagine you want to do procurement. Let's do procurement for NVIDIA. Obviously, they're very much at the tip of the spear on this whole AI revolution. They probably have this massive supply chain, going over to TSMC in Taiwan and the folks in Netherlands who come up with the machines, all that good stuff. If you were interviewing for a procurement role there, I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to ask you to tell me about a time that you worked with others from different backgrounds to solve a shared challenge. Because I think in some ways, that is the essence of procurement, like trying to build these bridges across the supply chain. And so, what I
Sure.
want you to do, Steve, before you answer directly, is again, jot down some notes. Always get ready, get your mind sort of primed. And I want you to think about a couple things. I want you to think about, the procurement world is full of acronyms and full of this inside baseball talk. Just give me a plain English description of what was going on. Then raise the stakes for me. Don't just say, hey, it was another day at the office. Give me a sense of why it mattered. Why should I care? Then walk me through what you did with some juicy details, especially details focused on relationships. Name the individuals you were working with, give me a sense of what they cared about, and then give me that happy ending we all crave with, again, some specific outcomes. Is that okay, Steve? Is that too much to ask for?
No, no, it's perfect.
Okay, so take your time. Everyone, do the same thing right now. Again, imagine you're facing the same question. How have you worked with someone from a different background? How have you accomplished a shared goal? Jot down your own notes. And as Steve is doing this, I'm going to show you a little AI hack. Watch this. If you come over to ChatGPT and you say, generate a SCAR answer for the question, tell me about a time you influenced a team, draw from my resume. I'm going to put in my personal resume here just to give you a sense of how this works. What you will see is that ChatGPT is very well trained in all of these frameworks, SCAR and STAR and all that good stuff. And it's really good at taking the raw ingredients of your experience and putting them into a format that flows nicely in all those ways we were talking about. So if you're feeling stuck at all, feel free to grab that prompt right from the chat, try it out, and then obviously customize it, massage it, make sure it's ready for prime time. Okay, with all that said, let me know, Steve, if you are ready to rock.
Ready to rock.
Okay, so Steve, thank you so much for coming in for the chat here at Santa Clara today, NVIDIA HQ. Obviously, one of the things we're looking for in an amazing procurement person is someone who just works beautifully across the supply chain. So tell me about a time, Steve, that you had to work with others from a different background to really drive huge results for your organization.
Sure, absolutely, and always good to be back in the peninsula. Um, Recently, I actually had the opportunity to help bridge two worlds for a large tech firm.
Yeah.
At the time, there were silos, if you will, between how we manage part of the supply chain. There are some folks that were legacy and very important to the business, but there was a new mandate to bring higher level sophistication to that supply chain. It was my responsibility as part of the leadership team to help win the hearts and the minds of my colleagues that were going to be joining forces with my scope. That was our challenge. Um, we had to, they were in different parts of the world. Over in Southeast Asia, we had to, go through all the normal logistics of finding times to meet, and in addition to language barriers, et cetera. While that's all great and practical, I also appreciated that we're coming at things from different perspectives, culture, business, et cetera. So I thought it'd be helpful on the front end if we just took time to get to know one another, not just, hey, how can we be best friends, but rather, what's your pains and,
Yeah.
what do successes look like? So we took the opportunity to get to know one another. That fused a little bit of a bond that then helped us to layer in more of the business critical matters. Ultimately, the outcome was that we were able to meet timelines as specified by our higher ups and ultimately get in line with the deliverables and various metrics that needed to be fulfilled. There's still learning curves along the way, but we were that much more in sync and cohesive as a result of the upfront investment in the relationship.
Awesome. And so I'm going to do what the best behavioral interviewers are supposed to do, Steve. And this is why they call it this top grading behavioral interview. I'm going to dig down a little bit. So,
Please.
Steve, I love that story you just told me. What would you say were like some of the biggest barriers that you faced? And like, can you give me a specific example of how you overcame one of those barriers?
Sure. Some of the biggest barriers that we faced were an expectation of it was almost like cart before horse. Hey,
Yeah.
here's the goals that we need to meet, by this date, have at it.
Yeah.
Well, there wasn't a clear path to how to do it. It was just, here's the destination, go figure out the journey.
Yeah.
So we ultimately had to sort through all that. And basically we applied, after doing kind of the level setting of getting to know one another and finding commonality, we agreed to apply a reverse engineering approach. So we took the answer that we were told to come up with, and we stripped it back and figured out what do we need to do to get to that summation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. And then last question for you, Steve, is how do you know it was successful? Like you said, you hit your deliverables, your metrics, but like, how do you know you really knocked it out of the park versus just sort of checked a box and, got the job done?
Sure. Yeah. I've learned over time to separate output from outcome. And
Yeah.
so there's output that we were mandated to achieve, the goals, if you will. And we checked those boxes. We saw the metrics coming in to make sure that, are we within tolerance and do we meet the expectations there? But the outcome was, beyond the output, was there repeat business? Are we moving more towards a pull versus, push system? And so, in fact, we wound up, finding that the business partners were less hesitant to work with us when they, saw the new approach that was intended to increase user experience beyond improving the supply chain processes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, Steve, this is awesome. I want everyone to blow it up with massive Michigan love for our guy, Steve, because putting yourself in the hot seat in front of 363 Wolverines, not easy to do. But I think that same courage is going to carry you over to that next opportunity, Steve. That being said, I owe you some feedback. So, first of all, what I loved is how cool and calm you were. I feel like a lot of times these interview questions, specifically behavioral questions, tend to go off the rails because we go off the rails. We go down some rabbit hole. we chase some specific line of thinking, and then as a result, it goes on for 5 minutes and you just completely lose the interviewer. So I love that it flowed and was smooth. I could even sort of jot down the notes on my notepad right here and follow it step by step. The only thing I'm going to push you on, Steve, and this is what's going to take you from a good storyteller to a great storyteller, is those details. Again, if I took out all the stuff from Star Wars and I just said there was a bad guy who was doing bad things and a heroic hero came in and saved the day and the universe was saved, is that an exciting story?
Uh,
Not so much, right,
Not
Steve?
so much.
Yeah. Versus if I tell you there's this guy in this black mask and he breathes like this and he's going around the world blowing up planets and someone who is actually his son has to stop him. Now are you intrigued?
Much more than
Yeah.
earlier.
That is the power of details, right? And I apologize for that bad Darth Vader impersonation. But the reality is, we all need that same sense of Darth Vaderness in our story. Like, okay, I know things were hard, I know cultures are different, but like, give me more of the juice. Give me a sense of like why things were ultimately falling apart or why things were shipping too late. And then when you start to tell me about your individual partners, don't just say, hey, there were some guys in Thailand. Say, hey, there was this guy Kantasak. He was the lead for the supply chain team in Bangkok. And Kantasak actually had a very different kind of set of incentives because his OKRs were this and this, which I got to know by sitting down for a Singha with him one day when I was in town. And if you get to that level of detail, I'm just completely drawn in on a human level. And this is the interesting thing. That's the thing that ChatGPT can't do. It can't take, a boring sort of story and make it amazing. That's the thing that we've got to draw out of ourselves to really capture that human imagination. Does that make sense, Steve?
Makes a lot of sense. I can definitely see how practice will hopefully position towards, making perfect. So need a little bit more practice here, but I appreciate the template.
Hey, well, you were awesome, Steve. And I owe you a couple more goodies. Number one, shoot me a message on LinkedIn. Let me know if I can hook you up with the book or the profile makeover. And then number two, if you want, try another turn at it on the LinkedIn tool. Send me some of those interview recordings. Happy to give additional feedback.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks
All
all.
right. Thank you so much, Steve. Everyone, give Steve some more love. Give him your best feedback. And then let's take a million questions when it comes to behavioral answers or anything else. By the way, for the Q&A, which I really love, I'm going to focus on the things that have upvotes. So if you see a question that you really like, don't feel the need to ask it again. Just give it a little thumbs up, and I'll be sure to take those first. And I'm going to speak to a couple things. First of all, I love that Judson called out James Earl Jones, of course, a Michigan alum, and one of the greatest of all time. So I love that connection. Elizabeth says, interesting, Jeremy, I was told not to use others' names. Yeah, no need to use the actual names, Elizabeth. But even if you use a pseudonym, it at least gives you something to hang your hat on and for the interviewer to remember long after the interview is over. From MRI studies, we know that people develop stronger memories when there are specific details. So make it easy to be memorable. Speaking of privacy, and I know Brooke spoke to this a little bit in the chat, if you're freaking out about ChatGPT, like, hey, they're going to steal all my info, do a couple things. Number one, you can always come over here and go to sort of incognito mode. Or what's even better is you come over here to the settings tab, you come over here to data controls, and where it says improve the model for everyone, simply turn this off. Now they are not going to keep your data, they're not going to train the model on your data, and you have the peace of mind that your data is truly your own. So I highly encourage doing that before you do anything else. Great call out. Okay, here's the top most upvoted question so far, and that is, isn't there a strong concern of ChatGPT generating the same interview question responses? Yeah, absolutely. So number one, when it comes to ChatGPT, you never want to ask for generic stuff like generate a cover letter for NVIDIA. This is no bueno because it's literally going to generate the same cover letter that everyone else gets. And the reason I know this is that recruiters are telling me, I am so sick of that opening line. I am excited to submit my application for X role at Y company. Clearly a sign that you used AI, clearly a sign that you're a little bit lazy, you're out of the process. So please don't fall into that trap. On the other hand, AI is super good at helping you differentiate and get ready if you give it more information. So notice what I did. I didn't say, just give me a generic answer. I said, draw from my specific resume. Those are the raw ingredients that no one else can duplicate. That's what makes me a differentiated candidate in that critical crucible. Always distinguish between those two. Okay, Oh, someone says these tell me about a time questions terrify me and make my mind go blank. Yes. Okay. The number one thing you can do is to get stories ready. Now, I don't want you to fall into that trap of trying to line up stories ahead of time for every possible question. There are too many permutations where if you only have sort of this brittle framework of this story goes with this specific question, you can crumble under the pressure. Instead, what I want you to do is to dive deep into like 5 of the juiciest, most important things you've ever done. And a really good way to do this, by the way, is to go back to your old performance reviews if you still have access to them, or even ask a former colleague out for coffee and say, hey, what would you be talking about if you were in my shoes? And there's something about that mirror effect where it's a lot easier for other people to see our awesomeness than for us to do it. And so, if you can get these really powerful stories, you'll find that they're great for teamwork, they're great for analytics, they're great for communication. They apply to almost everything under the sun. And if you only have a handful of stories, it's easy to keep them in your working memory because you're not trying to memorize 27 different answers. That is the ultimate solution. Having that story archive ready to go gives you the ultimate flexibility. Amazing question. Okay, let me go to Brooke and Kiera. Were there other questions, either in the chat or the Q&A, that you felt were like super burning and you really want me to speak to? Anything that you guys are seeing from where you sit?
Yeah, can you speak to anyone on the call who is a recent grad or maybe a current student, and maybe they don't have a ton of experience to pull from, professional experience to pull from?
Yes.
What
Oh,
are
so
some
important.
tips?
Yeah. Because I think one of the things that Kiera and I were talking about is the Michigan spectrum is so large. People who graduated 40 years ago, people who graduated 4 months ago. And if you're in that latter camp, you say, hey, it's not that I have too much experience, it's that I don't have enough quite yet. Now, here's the first thing you got to do. You got to tackle that sense. Because when I was at LinkedIn and I surveyed 1,000 recruiters across America, 40% of all recruiters told me that we value extracurricular, volunteer, academic experience on par with paid work. So even if you haven't had 100 paid jobs, fear not. You've got that same data mining challenge of go back to the stuff that you did as a club leader. Go back to the fact that you were working a full-time job or a part-time job to pay your way through the University of Michigan. Whatever you did to get you to this point, and I guarantee you did a lot, it is all valuable. And so what I want you to do is not to say, okay, when they ask me a question in an interview, I have to draw from my one paid internship. Instead, you draw from the entire rich tapestry of your life, wherever it's juiciest, wherever you have the best details, the biggest impact, that's the story you tell. And if you're feeling stuck at all, I want you to go right back to your coaches at Michigan, to your amazing alumni coaches. And by the way, Kiera can share some information in the chat about how to get hooked up with an alumni coach, or even just friends who went on this journey with you. Because again, they can pump you up in all these ways that you don't see yourself. Thank you for calling that out, Kiera. Okay, so with all that said, I know we're down to about a dozen minutes. So I do want to have time for our final pop quiz. And this is a fun one. We all know that Google is infamous for their crazy questions. Well, if you were to interview at the Googleplex today, March 18th, 2025, which of these questions would be most likely? A, how many golf balls can you fit inside a Boeing jet? B, tell me how many gas stations there are in Manhattan or Ann Arbor. Or C, my personal favorite, if I was an evil genius and I shrunk you down to the size of a nickel, encased you in a blender, how could you possibly escape? Okay, what do you think, Kiera? What's your instinct?
I hope none, because I can't answer any of those. But I'll
Yes.
go with what everyone else is saying. It looks like we have a good mix of B's and C's.
And I have to give Benjamin Sweeney some props. Benjamin said D, in other words, trick question, because Google doesn't ask these questions anymore. Let's go back to the whole point of this. I know that as job searchers, we hate every aspect of the process. We hate the resumes, we hate the cover letters, and we hate the interviews especially. But remember, we're not doing this as hiring managers and recruiters just because we're evil geniuses, but because we have this scary thing of bringing in a total stranger and hinging our performance to theirs, and we don't know what the future is going to hold. So we're trying to guess. And it turns out these are terrible ways to actually guess the future. So instead of getting these crazy estimation questions or crazy puzzle questions, you're a lot more likely to get a case question. And by the way, I don't mean a case question in the sense of like those McKinsey questions you might have heard about if you were interviewing for consulting firms back in Michigan, but more just here's the actual job you have to do at our company. How would you do it? Which I think is a pretty fair question. And so when you get these questions, avoid the classic trap of just falling into me, me, me. Okay, if I had to fix your broken piece of software, here's the amazing stuff that I would do. And now I've run out of ideas. That's all I've got. Because here's the little secret of these questions it is not about the answer, it is about the process and the delivery. And so if you just rush in with a bunch of random ideas and there's no logic, that's definitely not competent. And if you're only focused on your own needs as opposed to the customers and the employees, that comes off as pretty darn arrogant, pretty darn cold. So, what you want to do instead is a couple of Jedi mind tricks, if you will. The first one is you always ask for time on these really tough questions. I know it seems scary to basically hit time out, but I'm going to tell you if you do it right, you not only buy yourself time, you actually earn the interviewer's respect because you say, hey, this is a super important question. I want to think about it thoughtfully and respectfully. I'm going to organize my thoughts right now if that's okay. And what I have always felt as a hiring manager is the few people who have the guts to ask for that are the people that I want on my team because they're not afraid to give it their very best shot in the best way possible. And then what do you write down in your notepad? Hey, you need a structure. And it turns out there are four things that matter. Number one, you always start with the goals. This is not just about jumping in, coming up with features or ideas. It's by stepping back and understanding what is our North Star. Then, once you have a clear North Star, what's the best group to focus on to get there? You're going to segment your audience. You're going to think about all the different folks involved. Then you're going to do a Vulcan mind meld with this audience. You're going to put yourself in their shoes so you start to understand what they care about. And then and only then do you come down to solutions which will ultimately tie back to achieving that goal. And if you can take this approach, you're not just going to win the outcome, most importantly, you're going to win in the process and the delivery. You're going to come across as super organized, super logical, and of course, really thoughtful about the key audience, which is the customer base. And so, this GAPS method, goals, audience, pain point, and solutions, will solve 99% of all case questions you get. And to prove it to you, I need one volunteer to raise their hand right now, one last volunteer, and you're going to get that last opportunity. And our final volunteer is going to be Brian Collins. So, Brian, we're going to give you the microphone. Kiara's going to hook you up with that. Go ahead and click the unmute button, and we'll be ready to rock. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, thank you so much, Jeremy.
Of
Really
course,
appreciate
thank
your
you.
time on these.
Oh, I love this. This is great. And Brian, tell us a bit about yourself. Give us your Michigan bio.
Yeah, so I grew up in Ann Arbor and am a
Whoa.
two-time graduate from the University of Michigan now, LSNA and the Michigan Ross
Wow.
Masters of Management program. Now I live in Brooklyn, New York, or New York City, where I
Hey, the
work.
BK. I love it.
Yeah, your origin story, Jeremy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, my career is I am a TV commercial producer. I've always been really interested in entertainment. And so it's been a long journey to get into like making TV stuff.
Yeah.
But being a TV commercial producer is pretty fun work, and it's pretty much exactly on the road to what I wanted to do.
That's awesome. And so, are you thinking about interviewing for a role in that space or something else?
So yeah, I'm one of the people who has an interview today
Oh
at,
my
at
goodness.
3:30. Yep. So this is excellent practice. Thank you for that.
Wow. Okay. So
And yeah,
I want
moving
everyone out
out
there,
of
every Wolverine, whether you're a single Wolverine, double Wolverine, triple Wolverine, I want you to send all that Go Blue love to Brian and to all the folks who are interviewing this afternoon. And then Brian, are you ready to practice?
yes,
Okay,
thank
so
you.
here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna throw you a challenge. I'm gonna say, let's imagine that we are working on a TV commercial for, this is gonna be a really fun one, for Apple Intelligence. Now, for anyone who's involved in the tech world, you know that Apple Intelligence has been a huge black eye for Apple. Apple literally ran ads promoting features that did not exist and will never see the light of day. So now they're in a tough position, Brian, because they've got to come out with an ad that basically reestablishes their credibility and says, hey, you can trust us again. That's a lot to ask for a 30-second spot. But that's the case question I'm going to throw to you. If you had to develop a sort of strategic plan for Apple to rebuild their legitimacy as a company, how would you take that on? And so, um, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, if that's okay, Brian, to get your thoughts organized. And again, I want you to think about the goal. So, what does this actually look like for Apple or for the company you're going to work for? Who's the audience you want to target with this ad? What's their pain point? And then, or what are some potential solutions? Does that make sense?
Yes. Great.
Okay.
All
So,
right.
Brian,
Thanks for the
yeah,
2 minutes.
yeah, absolutely. So take your time, Brian. Everyone else, I want you to try this in your specific space. So, for example, let's say you want to work for a nonprofit and they say, hey, how are we going to serve more kids in Detroit with our limited resources? I want you to think through that. What's the goal? Who's the audience? How do we ultimately overcome some of those challenges? What are the solutions? If you are thinking about applying for a law firm, maybe it's a case that's pending and you're going to think about what's the legal strategy that we're going to take? What's our goal? Who are we trying to win over here? And so, for bottom line, I want you to make sure that you feel really comfortable with this format because, again, just like we were talking about before, this is going to get you ready no matter what they throw at you, no matter what crazy curveball comes your way. So, as everyone gets their thoughts organized, I'm going to come back to our friend Brian. And Brian, let us know if you are ready to rock here because I know we're down to just a couple minutes left.
Right. Give me one, maybe 30 more seconds if you don't mind.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks.
And I will tell you right now that the reality is that because we're thinking about the fact that someday we're going to put you in front of the CEO or the client, we don't necessarily care. Are you the world's greatest improv speaker? We care. Are you the most prepared, organized, clear, competent person? That's the person who's going to make us look good, who's going to help us get promoted, which is why it's totally fine to take time. Because if you're preparing to pitch to the CEO, no one's going to put you on the spot that way.
Yeah.
Okay, so Brian, thanks so much for coming in. I know we're at the final stage of this interview process. One last question. If we won the Apple account and we were tasked with basically overhauling their image vis-a-vis Apple Intelligence, what's your strategy? How do you take on that monster project?
A great question, and I've had to think about it for a bit. Yeah, it's tough because Apple being one of the tech leaders in the sphere, but commercial work is it's an oversaturated market. So first, you want to ask, what is the goal for Google? Is it to boost sales? Is it to boost reputation? Is it to increase or like highlight a new feature? Because that's seems to be some of the the pain points that they have.
Yeah,
But then you also got to think about how are they going to be utilizing this creative piece. So is it a TV commercial? Is it going to have some of the digital media buy behind it?
right.
You want to take a look at the landscape that this project is going to be aired at, and then you want to know what is their pain. So in particular, what historically have they found successes and areas of improvement for.
Yeah,
So Apple always does a lot of really interesting, much more narrative storytelling projects in their commercial work,
sure.
which leads me to I think you really want to base this into an excellent script, and it's got to be engaging, and you really want to make sure that you highlight in particular the Apple Intelligence feature, but of course, you want it to be a compelling story that keeps the audience wherever they are compelled and engaged.
Okay, great. And so I will give you a little more feedback or a little more time to dig in if we have more time. What I'll tell you right now, Brian, is I love that you went through that process because I think, again, it shows me that you're understanding, hey, what are we trying to achieve at an outcome level, not just, hey, how do we make a cool commercial, which of course is the trap aspect of this question. That being said, I'm going to give you the exact same feedback that we just gave to Steve, which is we need more skin on those bones. Because if I'm going to start to believe you as a visionary leader for this really critical project, I've got to see some of those details that make you a credible player. And so I want not just hypotheses in terms of, hey, maybe they care about this, maybe they care about that. We say, hey, flat out, the number one thing right now is that Apple is bleeding when it comes to credibility. Their net promoter score is going to be sinking because people just can't trust in them anymore, which is essentially the heart of their business. They have to solve that problem. And then once we understand that NPS is our goal, we think about who's the key audience here. It's not going to be the mainstream Apple folks because they say, oh, I don't even care about Apple Intelligence. It's got to be the folks on the early adopter side because they're the ones who are going out there telling their friends not to trust Apple anymore because they're so invested in the space. And you can see how that flows step to step to step, where I start to say, wow, Brian has just given me a case that is credible because it flows from a goal to an audience to a pain point, and it's believable because he gave me something I could sink my teeth into. Does that make sense, Brian?
Definitely. Would you also question on
Yeah.
that? Would you also say that like pulling out from examples is useful in that? Because I tried to steer away to stick to the framework, but it seems like maybe that would have been a good choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Because here's the reality. Again, as we were talking about before, people need, the high level logic, but they also need the specific examples. And so if you're going to call out a specific goal, that specific goal is going to lead to a specific audience. And that specific audience is going to have a specific pain point. So bottom line, specificity wins, abstraction falls flat. And I think you know that especially well as someone in the TV production space, right, Brian?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay,
Great.
beautifully done. Brian, I owe you a huge profile makeover or a copy of that book. Just drop me a line on LinkedIn and I'll send you a little career love straight to the BK. Okay, Brian?
Thank you so much, Jeremy.
All right, my pleasure. Okay, so everyone, give Brian tons of love. Good luck in that big interview this afternoon. And then let's see about this, Kira. Kira, I'm totally happy to stay on the line and answer some more questions. If you guys have to end from your side, that's totally fine too. You just let me know what you prefer.
Sounds good. Why don't we go ahead and do our closing so that
Yes,
those who need to go will have the information they need to do that,
beautiful.
and then we can stay on a little bit longer.
Yeah, let's do it. So I'll
All
just
right.
say from the closing side, obviously there's a lot of stuff that we covered today, and we're going to give you the recording, the slides, all that good stuff. But a couple other goodies too. Number one, if you want to stay in touch, ask any follow-up questions. And I apologize for not being able to answer all of them. Feel free to send any questions my way right on LinkedIn. Happy to respond today. Number two is I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to get a free copy of that book. So here's a little Amazon hack. If you come over here to Amazon, say, hey, I want that book, but right now I'm looking for a job. I don't have tons of resources. No what? No worries. You just go to Amazon, sign up for a Kindle Unlimited trial or an Audible trial. You cancel the trial immediately, and you still keep the book forever free with my compliments and those of Jeff Bezos. Although who knows what Jeff Bezos believes these days. So feel free to grab that book. And then one last crazy thing, which is back when I was at Michigan, I had this really lucky experience to work at Apple. So as you can tell, this whole story comes full circle for me. And while I was there, I got to see Steve Jobs in his last presentation on stage. And one of his classic tricks was always to end with one more thing. So my one more thing for today is Interview Bot 5K. Check this out. If you come over here and say, hey, here's the job I want. I want to be a CMO. Here's the resume I have. I want to really stand out in this a really tough crucible. What this will do is it'll walk you through the process. You'll say, I'm ready. Let's do this. And what you will see is that it will walk you through this process so that you actually start to feel really comfortable with whatever comes your way. So maybe it's going to start by asking for your background, tell me about yourself. And you can try out some of these techniques and even get feedback. I'm an all-star marketer. Trust me. You'll see that it's gentle, adjust glasses and leans forward, but it will push you in the right possible ways to help you get more specific, get more of those details that we're so hungry to hear about. So bottom
That's
line,
really cool.
feel free to try this tool. There's a link in the chat, totally free. And then go out there and just like Steve said, leave that big old honking dent in the universe. I love the fact that Michigan folks are doing the coolest jobs in the world, and I cannot wait to see you absolutely leave your mark in all that comes next. And with that said, I want to turn it back to Kiera, to Brooke, to share all their final notes, and then we'll come back for a couple final questions as well.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Everyone, please give Jeremy as much love as he's given to us today. We do have a link to our survey in the chat. Please go ahead and click that and give us some feedback, and we'll share the feedback with Jeremy as well. And then, as Jeremy said, we're going to share a lot of resources with you in the follow-up email that we'll send to you. And that includes resources that are available from the Alumni Association on demand. So please check that out. All right. So Jeremy, a question that came up. Oh, sorry. And we have to say, go blue.
That's right.
So a question that came up during the session and then also before the session was people talking about returning to work after a career break.
Yeah.
Different scenarios, but ultimately the same sentiment. Can you provide any tips on what you should be thinking about in your interviews as you're returning to work, especially if you have a gap in your resume?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me share my screen again just so I can show you a couple of techniques. And then basically, you're going to basically want to have this approach of, hey, I know that it's tempting to come in there and to feel apologetic. Oh, I'm so sorry. I've been out of the work, whatever. No way. You own your own story. You tell the story the way that you want to tell it. And the way that I want you to tell that story so badly is all the value you can create, not things that you don't even have to apologize for in the first place. So, in terms of telling your story the right way, if you're going to add this to your profile, your resume, check this out. LinkedIn has this tool where if you come in here to the experience section and say, hey, I want to add some information to explain that career gap, you add a career break. And it could be for any number of reasons, taking care of a parent, taking care of a child, bereavement, whatever it is. And now it's going to show up beautifully in the flow of your experience, as opposed to that awkward way that we used to have to do it, where it was like a broken image and you just said, like, out of work. So, bottom line, represent yourself with style, with class. And then when you get into the interview room, just like we talked about in the tell me about yourself part, you're not coming in and talking about all the reasons you were out of work recently. You're talking about all the things you can do for that employer to solve their problems. I cannot stress this enough that even during tough economies, even during tough moments in time, we have so much power at our fingertips to control our destiny, so much agency to shape the story about ourselves in the world. I want you to own that power and use it wisely to tell the story that gives you the very best shot for opportunity. Love that question, Kira.
Thank you, Jeremy. Another question that got quite a few upvotes. I was laid off due to lack of nursing accommodations. How can I answer the question why you left your last position with a positive response that doesn't lie, and if possible, not mention how young my child
Yeah,
is?
absolutely. That is so right because it's not your job to have to apologize for your stupid former employer. You just say, hey, at the end of the day, like it wasn't the right fit for me in terms of what I want to do, but let me explain why I'm super excited about this opportunity. You don't get caught up in details, you don't go down those rabbit holes, and then you quickly pivot to not just focusing on deficits. Okay, here's why I left, but assets. Here's what I can do for you. Here's why I can rock this role tomorrow. And that is music to my ears as a hiring manager. Like, I know recruiters give you the runaround. They say, oh, you didn't have the right keywords on your resume. Hiring managers don't care about that. They need someone to come in, make their problems go away, make them look awesome in front of their own boss, give them a chance to take a vacation once in a while. If you can paint that picture for me, you're practically hired already.
That's great. Thank you. We also had a question about tips for interviewing at a career fair or a networking
Ooh.
event.
Yeah. So again, I think the really important way to think about the labor market is truly as a marketplace. So whether you studied business at Michigan or not, you have that classic supply and demand understanding of when the supply is high and the demand is weak, that makes it a tough place to be a job seeker. And that's why I'm not a huge fan of career fairs and just general things where there's like 1,000 job seekers and like one hiring manager or one recruiter. Instead, what your goal really to do is to change the ratio. So imagine now that you have found the hiring manager for your future company on LinkedIn. And let's just pick someone from as an example here. Let's say you want to work for Lisa Marie. If you can discover that these people are mutual connections, you can have them reach out to Lisa on your behalf and tell her why you're so awesome. If you can look at her job description and understand what she needs and tell her what you can do, you've just changed the ratio from you as one of 1,000 candidates to you as a sample size of one. The only one who had the guts to reach out through a mutual connection, the only one who had the guts to reach out directly to the hiring manager, not just apply online. Again, you want to put yourself in a totally different category away from the rest of the job seekers who are just like sort of undifferentiated mass. Because when you stand out, you've just increased your value, and that's where you always want to be in any kind of marketplace.
Awesome, thank you. And as a reminder, everyone, please go ahead and upvote the questions in the
Yeah,
Q&A
these are
that you would
great, by the
like for
way.
us to answer. All right, another one, and you touched on this already, but maybe you have more to share. Do you have advice for handling questions that relate to skills that you have less experience with? For example, you're applying for a supervisory position, but have limited to no supervisory experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So it turns out that LinkedIn actually has an entire tool designed to help you basically level up in all those areas. And of course, that's LinkedIn Learning. So let's say you came over here and you said, I want to, learn about how to become a really rock star manager. So I come in here, I put in managerial, skill development, and you say, okay, essential lessons for first-time managers. Perfect. This is what I need. But then LinkedIn says, wait a second, this thing costs 30 bucks a month, or you need LinkedIn Premium. Say, I don't have that kind of money. Guess what you do? You head over to the Ann Arbor Public Library, or the Seattle Public Library, or the New York City Public Library. You looked up LinkedIn Learning, and what you will discover is that every single one of these places has a free LinkedIn Learning account. And as a result, if you just get your library card in hand, you have free access to all of these tools whenever you want them. And so the bottom line is, if you want to use 2025 as a chance to upskill, to build out those new muscles, don't pay for the privilege of it. Get it for free, courtesy of your awesome public library.
What a great pitch for the public library.
That's right. I know. I'm a little bit of a library fanboy, but even
Me
aside
too.
from that, I think it's an incredible offer.
Me too. All right, why don't we do two more questions? Is that
Yeah,
okay, Jeremy?
perfect. Let's
All
do
right.
it.
How do you strike the balance between being practiced and prepared for answering common behavior questions, but not sounding scripted?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I like that idea of the like framework plus the archive of 5 juicy stories. Let's say they throw a curveball at you. So we'll go over to ChatGPT. We'll say, generate 10 crazy behavioral questions, things that are totally out of left field, just to see what we can come up with here. Um, and it says, tell me about a time you had to make a decision with only 10% of the information. Well, you might say, oh my goodness, I didn't plan for that. And if your entire process was having memorized answers, you're going to feel broken. You're going to feel completely stuck. But on the other hand, if you're like, okay, I've got this juicy story about a time when I was starting a new business, and new businesses are inherently very ambiguous, very hard to figure out. Plus, I've got the SCAR framework. Let's think how I can put it all together. Okay, here's the situation. I was starting this new business, but I wasn't really sure about what the marketplace wanted. My challenge was, how do I learn about all these customers, even if I've never met them and I've never been in their shoes? Now I start to walk through some of the things I did, just recounting what I did because I had that story so deeply embedded in my memory. And you can see how, even if you have these crazy questions, if you just have the framework plus the archive, that's enough to give you the skeleton structure, plus the authenticity, plus the live storytelling that you're going to tell on the spot. That's the best of both worlds.
All right,
All right, the
last
grand finale,
question.
Kiara.
The grand finale. All right. How many bullet points is ideal per job on your resume? I
Yeah.
find that with the more experience I have, I'm in a role where I didn't read that well at all. Maybe you can see it. I find with the more experience I have in a role where I wear many different hats, it's hard to be concise. There we go.
Yes. Okay. So I'm glad you mentioned resume because the beautiful thing about a resume versus a LinkedIn profile is you can literally have a different resume for every job.
Yes.
Now, I'm not recommending that you do that. Instead, I would say, hey, probably have a resume per category of job. So one for product manager, one for product marketer. But what you're going to do to overcome that problem of having too many bullets is you're going to cut it down to just the bullets that are relevant for that job. So imagine coming over here to ChatGPT, say, which of these bullets um, are most relevant for a PM role? And I put in my existing marketing resume. What it will help me do is get rid of all the stuff that's just wasting time, that's just taking up space, and instead focus on the things that PM recruiters actually care about. And to provide some of the underlying logic behind it, and this is a good thing to end on, is at the end of the day, just like we were talking about it with interviews, resumes, LinkedIn profiles, they are read by humans if you play your cards right. And for us humans, there is nothing more painful than coming to, let's look at a bad resume template and finding this like eye chart where there's like 8,000 things and 8-point fonts and it's impossible to get a sense of what you really did because my eyes are just watering and I just want to put it away. Don't do that to a fellow human. Don't give them that painful experience. Give them the love that comes with a really carefully crafted resume that speaks just to the things they care about and not to anything else. And if you can apply that filter and help out your fellow human, you have not only helped yourself do a great job, you've been an awesome human being in the process. And that is the goal of everything we do here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you so much for spending a little more time with us today.
Of
And we
course.
have over 200 people still here. That's
Whoa.
amazing. That's awesome. All right. So, as a reminder, everyone, we will share the recording of this webinar with you via email in the next couple of days, as well as a world of resources. So, thank you for spending some time with us today. Good luck with your future endeavors. We will be here with you every step of the way. So, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. That's it, Jeremy. Another one in the book. I'll
Hey, well,
call
I
it
just got to give a lot
success.
of love to the Alumni Association. You guys are a small team, but you are a mighty strong team. So everyone give some love up for your association team because they are rocking the house. And as you guys head out into those interview rooms, just think about this. Close your eyes. You've got an army of Wolverines standing behind you, ready to stand strong with you. So bottom line,
Absolutely.
go out there, rock the world, go blue.
Go blue.